Usually, when we talk about a failure like, say, a car crash or broken machine, there's this expectation of, well, precision. You look at the skid marks, you find the snapped belt, and the investigator just points and says, yep, there it is. That is what caused the accident.
Right, yeah, we absolutely crave that binary view. Broken or not broken, we want a clean, visible chain of cause and effect because, honestly, it gives us a sense of control over our environment.
Exactly. But step into the world of complex human systems, high-stakes operations, or, even just a chaotic Tuesday managing your team, and that precision just completely vanishes. We end up looking at a landscape of failure that is incredibly murky. So today we are taking a deep dive into this incredibly dense, really fascinating source you sent over, the LFEO student notes.
Yeah, the Learning from Emergent Outcomes manual.
Right, LFEO. And it's a comprehensive manual used in these intensive workshops, heavily rooted in human and organizational performance, often called HOP, and interestingly, the technical diving community. Our mission today is to figure out why smart, well-trained people make catastrophic mistakes, and why our standard methods for investigating those mistakes are fundamentally broken. So, okay, let's unpack this. We always want to find a root cause or blame human error when things go wrong. But what if human error isn't a cause at all, but just a symptom of a system that was basically destined to fail?
Well, getting into this is going to completely rewire how you view failure, success, and really the invisible systems governing your daily work. Because before we can learn from any failure, we have to understand that our fundamental baseline for how work happens is usually an illusion.
Wait, an illusion?
Yeah, totally. The manual introduces this vital distinction between WII work as imagined and WDA work as done. So work as imagined is the pristine, perfect procedure in your company manual. It is how the organization expects things to be executed in a total vacuum.
Oh, right. Like, it's the perfect recipe video on social media, right? The ingredients are perfectly pre-chopped in little glass bowls, the kitchen is spotless, the lighting is gorgeous. That's work as imagined.
Exactly.
But work as done is cooking that exact same recipe on a Tuesday night with a missing ingredient, a super dull knife, a pot boiling over, and like a screaming toddler clinging to your leg.
That is the perfect way to put it. Work as done is the messy reality. It's time pressure, degraded equipment, competing priorities. It's people making sensible on-the-fly adjustments just to achieve the goal in front of them. And the crucial takeaway from the manual is that the gap between the pristine recipe video and the messy kitchen isn't a failure. It's entirely normal. It exists in every single organization that does complex work.
But okay, let me push back on that a bit. If this gap between imagination and reality is completely normal, why do organizations treat it like a disease? Like, why do they constantly try to cure it with more compliance checks, more audits, and just, more rigid rules?
Because conventional investigations are built on the assumption that events have a single root cause to pull. They assume that if you just, follow the procedure, you are perfectly safe. But in complex systems, outcomes are emergent.
Emergent, meaning what exactly?
Meaning they arise from multiple interacting factors that individually seem totally fine. Safety isn't manufactured in a procedure manual. It is created by the workers in the space between what is planned and what actually has to happen when conditions inevitably change.
Wow, okay. So because organizations misunderstand that gap, they end up using the completely wrong language to investigate errors, which basically shuts down actual learning. I was looking through these workshop notes, and there's this striking visual. It's a big, aggressive red X crossing out terms we use literally every day.
Yeah, that's a really powerful part of the manual.
Right. Like human error, crossed out. Root cause, crossed out. Failure to follow procedures, crossed out. Instead of human error, the manual insists we must say actions shaped by system conditions.
What's fascinating here is how the manual breaks down the traps of language by highlighting agentive and counterfactual language.
Yeah.
So agentive language places a person as the active cause. You say, the diver failed to check their gas, or the operator chose not to abort.
Putting it all on the individual.
Exactly. It implies the outcome could have been avoided if they just magically chose differently, completely ignoring all the pressure and context acting upon them in that exact moment. And then you have counterfactual language, which is the backwards-looking should have or could have. Like, oh, they should have followed the correct procedure.
But knowing someone should have done something tells you absolutely nothing about why they didn't. It's just telling a story about something that never actually happened.
Spot on.
Yeah.
That language creates what the manual calls the first story. It's a surface account that stops inquiry right at the individual. The investigator finds the broken rule, blames the worker, and, well, the job is supposedly done.
Case closed.
Right. But real learning only lives in the second story. That's the thorough account of the conditions, the pressures, the knowledge gaps that made the person's action feel completely rational in the moment. The HOP framework, this is known as local rationality, because nobody wakes up wanting to make a catastrophic error.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate for the listener here. If we never say human error and we always just point to the system conditions, aren't we giving reckless workers a free pass to make mistakes? It sounds kind of like nobody is ever held accountable.
That's a very common concern, and the manual addresses that by leaning heavily on the concept of just culture. Just culture explicitly separates learning from accountability. It draws a hard line between three different behaviors. First, you have human error, which is unintentional.
Okay, an honest mistake.
Right. Second is at-risk behavior, where someone is drifting from safe practice without realizing the actual level of danger. And third is truly reckless behavior, which is a conscious, unjustified choice to take a massive risk. Reckless behavior absolutely requires accountability. But punishing a genuine human error doesn't fix the system. It just teaches everyone else to hide their mistakes.
Yeah, you just drive the truth underground.
Precisely. And this is compounded by outcome bias. We judge the quality of a decision based on the final result, rather than the information available to the person at the time. I mean, think about it. If an employee takes a risky shortcut and saves the company $1 million, they get a promotion.
Oh, for sure. They're a hero.
But if they take the exact same shortcut under the exact same conditions and the machinery breaks, they are fired. Outcome bias ensures that good luck is rewarded, bad luck is punished, and zero actual learning takes place.
That makes so much sense. You know, disasters often feel really sudden, as if they happen out of nowhere. But the manual argues they actually build up slowly, right under our noses, through a process called drift.
Yes, drift is huge. It's the slow, incremental movement of a system away from its intended safety baseline. It's largely invisible, and it happens with everyone's tacit approval, because it's driven by the ordinary daily pressures of just getting work done.
Give me an example of how that plays out.
Well, the manual cites Scott Snook's study on the 1994 Black Hawk shootdown, which was a really tragic friendly fire incident. Snook found it wasn't a sudden, extraordinary failure. It was the result of, quote, normal people behaving in normal ways in normal organizations.
Wow.
Yeah. Over time, the formal coordination rules had been practically abandoned because they were just too cumbersome. This is called practical drift.
It also mentions Diane Vaughn's work on the Challenger space shuttle disaster, right? The normalization of deviance.
Exactly. With Challenger, there were physical warning signals erosion on the O-rings during previous flights. But because those flights kept returning safely, engineers and managers collectively reclassified that erosion as an acceptable risk. The deviance was normalized. The warning signal literally morphed into background noise.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like driving, right? The speed limit is 60, but you drive 65. Nothing bad happens. You don't get a ticket. So next week it's 70. Eventually, driving 75 feels like work as normal. The safety margin is entirely gone, but because nothing catastrophic has happened yet, nobody even notices the danger.
That's exactly how it happens.
So how does a team know if they are managing a known risk versus just normalizing a dangerous deviance?
Well, managing risk requires that hazards are explicitly known, margins are actively monitored, and decisions to accept risk are conscious and documented. Normalization of deviance happens when the warning signals are actively present, but are progressively ignored and absorbed into routine operations without ever updating the actual risk model. It just becomes this unspoken habit rather than a calculated choice.
Okay, so we've seen how systems slowly drift toward the edge over months or even years. But when the system actually crosses that line into a crisis, what actually happens inside the human brain? The manual dives into joint cognitive systems theory, or JCS, and the core idea here is that cognition isn't just happening inside your skull.
Right, cognition is distributed. Under JCS theory, your ability to think and solve problems is spread across you, your tools, your displays, your teammates, and the procedures you rely on. When something goes wrong, the failure is rarely confined to one single brain. It's a property of the interactions between all those elements.
Like, how does that work in practice?
Think of a pilot. They don't memorize their exact altitude and speed second by second, right? The dashboard holds that information for them. The human and the tool form a single cognitive unit.
To understand how that unit behaves under stress, the manual introduces COSM, a contextual control model. It describes the quality of control you have over a situation, ranging from strategic down to tactical, then opportunistic, and finally scrambled.
And to explain how we shift between those modes, the manual breaks down the brain's bandwidth into 4 ECOM layers. It's critical to understand what these layers actually govern. First is targeting. This is your high-level goal setting, deciding what the overall mission is.
Got it.
Second is monitoring. Think of this as your brain's radar, scanning the environment for anomalies or early warning signs. Third is regulating, which is managing the immediate, conscious, physical tasks to achieve a goal. And finally, tracking. These are the automated micro-movements, like making tiny steering adjustments that require almost zero conscious thought.
There's this incredible case study in the notes about a diver named James on the M2 wreck that perfectly illustrates how these layers just completely collapse.
It's a textbook example. So James was trying to photograph a wreck in a really strong current. During his briefing on the boat, he was in strategic control. He was thinking about the big picture, the gas plan, the slack tide window. His targeting layer was fully active, setting overarching goals. Then he actually gets in the water.
And he hits the heavy current, right, and has to fight just to hold his camera steady.
Exactly. The physical demand of fighting that current consumes massive amounts of his cognitive bandwidth. So he drops from strategic control down to opportunistic control. His goals narrowed entirely from, manage this complex dive safely to simply just get this photo. His regulating layer is using all available brain power just to physically fight the water.
And because all his processing power was going into that physical effort, his monitoring layer literally went dark.
It did. The monitoring layer is what watches the whole system. It's what tells you, hey, where's my dive buddy? For James, that layer had no power left to run. By the time he looked up, his buddy was gone. He didn't make a conscious decision to ignore his partner. His brain simply didn't have the metabolic resources to run the monitoring program while simultaneously fighting the current.
That is wild. But it's exactly what happens when you're driving on a familiar highway. Your tracking layer steering, maintaining speed is completely automatic. Your monitoring layer is casually scanning for brake lights ahead. And your targeting layer is, thinking about what you're going to make for dinner.
Exactly.
But then a massive blinding rainstorm hits. You lean forward, grip the wheel, and instinctively reach over and turn off the radio.
Yes. You are shedding cognitive load just to survive.
You are dropping into opportunistic mode. You abandon the targeting layer like you don't care about dinner anymore at all. You just care about the taillights 10 feet in front of you. So does this mean experienced professionals aren't necessarily better at the physical task in a crisis? Their tracking layer is just cheaper on the brain, freeing up bandwidth for the monitoring layer.
That is exactly it. An experienced person's basic physical skills run on autopilot. Because of that, they notice the subtle warning signs that a novice whose brain is entirely consumed by just trying to stay afloat completely misses.
Okay, so if the human brain's monitoring layer is so vulnerable to overload, we can't just rely on the person to fix a crisis. We have to look at the surrounding structure to see where the system failed them. And to do that systematically, the manual uses a framework called PETTEOT.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, PETTEOT stands for person, environment, tasks, tools and technology, external influences, organization, and time. Investigators use these 7 buckets to systematically build a map of an incident.
So it forces you to zoom out.
Exactly. It forces you to look beyond the human. Instead of stopping at, well, the person made a mistake, you examine how the tools might have forced a bad task design, or how external influences like budget cuts change the environment. But the most critical element in that framework, the one that governs absolutely everything else, is time.
Time. The manual lays out this time model equation. Available time, which is the window between an event starting and it becoming an irreversible disaster, must be greater than evaluation time, plus selection time, plus performance time. Basically, you need enough time to detect the problem, choose a solution, and actually execute the physical fix.
And the tragedy here is that available time is often consumed completely before the event even starts. There's a devastating case study in the manual about a diver named Linnea Mills. She was wearing a dry suit with 45 pounds of non-ditchable lead weights, and her buoyancy compensator only had 25 pounds of lift.
That's a catastrophic physical mismatch. Just mathematically.
It is. The manual points out that the moment she hit the water, her available time for self-rescue was functionally 0. It honestly didn't matter what decision she made underwater. No amount of in-water competence could recover what the pre-dive equipment configuration had already stolen from her. The time to evaluate, select, and perform a rescue was mathematically eliminated before the crisis even began.
Wow. We treat time as a reactive resource in everyday life. We say things like, oh, I just ran out of time to fix it, or it happened too fast. But this manual is saying time is a predetermined constraint. That completely flips how you and I should look at preparing for any high-stakes task, right? Like, if you were managing a project launch, the time you have to fix a crisis on launch day is dictated by the constraints you accepted on day one.
100%. If you compress a schedule or under-resource a team during the planning phase, you're extending the time it will take them to evaluate and select a response, while simultaneously shrinking the available time before the project fails. You're baking the failure right into the system. And this is why looking at the interactions between the PETTEOT elements is where real learning lives.
Interactions, right.
The manual highlights the HMS Scylla tragedy, where 3 highly experienced instructors executed a deep wreck penetration without a guideline, and 2 died. If you just look at the elements in isolation, you miss the true cause entirely. It was the interactions that were deadly.
Yeah, specifically, an interaction between an amplification of confidence and a cultural constraint. They were highly experienced on the shallow parts of the wreck, which amplified their confidence for the deep, really complex parts.
And that amplified confidence interacted with their informal culture of deep mutual trust. That trust actually constrained their ability to speak up, because they were all experts who trusted each other implicitly. Raising a concern about basic navigation protocols felt unnecessary, perhaps even socially awkward.
So they didn't speak up.
No, they didn't explicitly agree on a guideline during the briefing. Once inside, when the silt kicked up and visibility dropped to absolute zero, their available time vanished. The interaction of high trust and high confidence created a fatal blind spot.
So what does this all mean? How do we apply all of this to our own work to actually stop the cycle of blame? Well, the manual advocates for running what they call learning teams. And these are not formal investigation panels or disciplinary boards. They are facilitated conversations with the people closest to the work, exploring that messy gap between work as imagined and work as done.
Crucially, though, the first session of a learning team must be strictly in learning mode only. It is incredibly tempting to jump straight to solutions, to write a new rule or to fix the visible problem immediately. But if you generate solutions before you deeply understand the context, you just address the symptoms and add more clunky procedures to work as imagined.
And to stop that urge to just fix it right away, the manual mandates something called soak time. Basically, you have the first learning team session, you map out the messy reality, and then you just adjourn and sleep on it. Why does that step away actually work?
It is space practice for the brain. By stepping away, the brain's default mode network kicks in. It allows cognitive processing to map those complex, non-linear interactions we talked about, like the interaction between culture and confidence, rather than locking on to the easiest linear cause and effect. It stops investigators from falling back into the first story of blame.
So when the learning team finally reconvenes to look for solutions, they have to search for something called protective interactions.
Yes. When analyzing a broken system, we are almost entirely focused on eliminating the failures. We look for the broken interactions. But we must also identify the protective interactions, the things that are actively keeping the system safe, even if they aren't written down in any official manual anywhere. Sometimes an informal habit, a specific communication style, or an unofficial workaround is providing incredible incidental resilience.
It's an invisible safety net. If management comes in with a rigid new procedure and eliminates that workaround because, well, it doesn't fit the perfect work as imagined recipe, they might accidentally destroy the very thing preventing a catastrophe.
Exactly. You attempt to fix the system, and in doing so, you systematically strip away the context and habits that were keeping your people alive or keeping your project afloat. The most dangerous failures and the most profound successes are woven right into the invisible fabric of how we interact with our tools, our environment, and each other.
I mean, it's a whole other ballgame. So we leave you with a final thought to mull over in your own operations. Look past the manuals and the official protocols. What accidental safety nets, what unwritten protective interactions are currently holding your daily work together? And if an auditor came in tomorrow and forced your team to perfectly follow the recipe, would you even notice when those invisible safety nets disappeared? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you.